It was exactly 3:15 in the morning when the key scraped in the front door lock. I know the exact time because the grandfather clock had just chimed 3, and I'd counted every one of the 15 ticks that followed. I was sitting in my reading chair in the kitchen, wrapped in my bathrobe, a thick fleece one in deep burgundy. I'd bought it last winter because my joints ache something terrible with Charleston's damp and cold. I remember thinking when the package arrived that it felt like a warm embrace, and that morning I was clutching it around me like armor, trying to find some kind of warmth, some kind of protection from the cold that was coming from inside me. The door flew open with a bang, like it had been kicked, and slammed against the hallway wall. The sound echoed through the silent house. My heart leaped and started hammering a frantic rhythm in my chest. I held my breath. I waited. Marcus came in, a dark silhouette against the dim streetlight. The rain had gotten heavier, and he was soaked to the bone. Water dripped from his hair, from his jacket, making a dark puddle on my hardwood floor. He looked like a wounded, angry animal, seeking shelter from the storm. He just stood there for a moment, his breathing heavy, almost a growl. Then he moved. With sudden fury he yanked the keys from his pocket and hurled them with all his strength toward the entry table. I heard the sharp crash of porcelain shattering. My figurine. My blue porcelain figurine that had belonged to my mother. The sound of that heirloom breaking was like the sound of my own heart splitting in two. A dry sob rose in my throat, but I forced it down. Crying now? No. Crying would be a luxury and it would be dangerous. He didn't seem to care what he'd broken. He kicked the door shut and came walking toward the kitchen. His steps were heavy, unsteady. The smell hit me first. Sharp, sour bourbon mixed with rain and pure rage. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, his large frame filling it completely. The only light was the one over the stove, a yellowish glow that cast long, frightening shadows. His eyes found me in the dimness. "What are you doing, Mom?" His voice was thick, slurred from the drink. He took a step into the kitchen, sitting there in the dark like some ghost, waiting up to lecture me, to judge me. I didn't move from my chair. I kept my hands gripped tight on the armrests, feeling the worn fabric beneath my fingers. I knew from experience that any movement could be seen as provocation. Silence was my only defense. "Answer me," he suddenly yelled, and his voice bounced off the pots hanging on the wall. "Are you praying for my lost soul? Or are you more worried about your damn old figurine I just broke?" The mention of the figurine, the callousness with which he spoke of something he knew meant so much to me, sparked a courage I didn't know I still had. I stopped rocking. Slowly, with what little dignity I had left, I stood up. My back cracked. I looked him straight in the eye, trying to find somewhere deep down any trace of my boy. "Marcus, son." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I'm not going to lecture you. I just want you to get some rest. You're soaking wet. You'll catch cold. We can talk in the morning when you're feeling better." It was the wrong thing to say. I should have known. Trying to reason with a man who's lost his reason is like trying to put out a fire with a thimble of water. My words, my calm, my motherly concern, to him they sounded like an insult, like I was treating him like a child. His face twisted into a mask of fury. "Don't you tell me what to do," he roared, taking another step toward me. He pointed a trembling finger at my face. "You don't understand anything. You never have. You live in your little fantasy world with your old junk, your memories, Dad's ghost. The real world is out there, Mom, and it's eating me alive. And you just sit there and tell me to go to sleep." That's not what I started to say, holding up a hand in a gesture of peace. "Shut up." His shout was so violent I flinched, and then he came at me. It wasn't a shove, it was an assault. He grabbed my upper arms with a strength I never imagined he possessed. Strength born of frustration and alcohol. His fingers were like steel clamps digging into my thin skin. The pain was immediate and searing. "Marcus, stop. Please, you're hurting me," I cried out, and for the first time, my voice broke with panic. But he wasn't listening. His eyes were glazed over, focused on something only he could see. He started shaking me back and forth violently. My body, frail and old, swung like a rag doll. My head snapped back and forth. My reading glasses flew off my face and landed on the floor with a soft thud. The world around me became a blur of lights and shadows. The kitchen shelves, the refrigerator, the table, everything spinning. You only care about things. About this house. About him, he was screaming. And with every word he shook me harder. I'm nothing to you. I never was. I'm just a burden. The failure son of the great Thomas Mitchell. I was getting dizzy. Air wouldn't come into my lungs. I tried to pull away, but it was useless. He was so much stronger. At some point during the violent shaking, my feet lost contact with the floor. And that's when he threw me. It wasn't a push. He threw me. My body flew backward toward the wall where my grandmother's china cabinet stood. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the dark wood of the cabinet getting closer, as if in slow motion. There was no time to protect myself, to put my arms out. The impact was brutal. First, my back hit with a deep, hollow thud against the solid wood. I felt like my spine was going to snap in two. The blow knocked the wind out of me in a single painful gasp. And in the same instant, my head, carried by momentum, whipped to the side and cracked hard against the corner of the cabinet. An explosion of white light and sharp pain behind my eyes. The sound was a dry crack that seemed to echo inside my skull. The world went white for a second. A loud ringing like 1,000 bees filled my ears. I slid down the wall, my legs like jelly, and collapsed to the floor. The pain was overwhelming. Throbbing pain in the back of my head. Sharp pain in my back. Burning pain in my arms where he'd grabbed me. I was stunned, confused. I tried to focus my eyes. I saw the kitchen spinning, the lights distorting, and then I saw him. He was standing a few feet away, his chest heaving, his fists clenched. He was looking down at me on the floor with an unreadable expression, and I thought, it's over. He'll stop now? He'll realize what he's done. But no, he took a step toward me. I flinched instinctively, trying to shield myself with my arms, and his hand came up, open, fast, violent. The slap cracked through the air. An ugly, wet sound. It caught me square across the face. My head was thrown to the side from the impact. I felt the skin of my lip tear against my own teeth, and the hot, salty taste of blood filled my mouth. And that was it, the final act. He stood there over me for a few more seconds, his breathing still heavy. I looked up at him from the floor. My son, the baby I'd carried in my arms, the boy I'd taught to walk, to talk, to pray, and I didn't recognize him. The man standing in front of me, with his hate-filled eyes, was a stranger, an intruder, a monster. And then, without another word, as if he'd finally expelled all the poison he was carrying, he turned. He turned his back on his mother lying bruised and bleeding on the kitchen floor, and he went upstairs. I heard his footsteps, heavy and slow, in the upstairs hallway. And then the final sound, the slam of his bedroom door, a sound that sealed my fate, and his, the sound that began the longest morning of my life. The silence that settled in the kitchen after his bedroom door slammed shut was the heaviest thing I've ever felt in my life. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a vacuum, a silence of shock, the kind of quiet that comes after an explosion when everything around you is destroyed, and the dust hasn't settled yet. The only thing I could hear was the sound of rain outside, relentless, and the sharp ringing inside my own head. I lay there on the floor for what felt like an eternity. My whole body ached, every muscle, every bone. The back of my head throbbed with a steady, nauseating rhythm. The taste of blood in my mouth was strong, and I could feel a warm trickle running down my chin. I was curled up, my arms wrapped around my knees like a frightened child. And for a moment, that's all I was, scared, terrified. A 68-year-old woman, alone, hurt on the floor of her own home, by the person she loved most in the world. The tears came silent, hot, They ran down my face and mixed with the blood on my chin. They weren't tears of anger. They were tears of pure, absolute grief. A grief that wasn't just physical. It was the pain of betrayal, the pain of looking at the child you brought into this world and seeing a stranger. The pain of realizing that the love you gave, the life you sacrificed, had produced this a man, capable of raising his hand to his own mother. I thought of my Thomas. What would he say if he saw me like this? Thomas was a gentle man, but a firm one. He never raised his voice to me in 30 years of marriage. He treated his own mother, a small, delicate woman, like she was made of porcelain. If he saw what Marcus had become, his heart would break all over again, wherever he was. The image of my husband gave me a spark of strength. I couldn't just lie here on the floor crying. Thomas wouldn't have wanted that. My mother wouldn't have wanted that. My grandmother, who'd faced things I can't even imagine, certainly wouldn't have wanted that. I'm made of stronger stuff. I'd just forgotten. With a groan of pain, I pushed myself up, using the leg of the kitchen table for support. The cold, solid wood gave me an anchor. Slowly, inch by inch, I got to my feet. My legs were shaking so badly, I thought I'd fall again. I held onto the edge of the table, breathing deeply, trying to fight off the dizziness. The whole kitchen seemed to be swaying. When I felt a little steadier, I walked slowly, holding onto furniture, to the powder room under the stairs. Every step was agony. When I got there, I reached out a trembling hand and flipped on the light. And then I looked in the mirror. The fluorescent light was merciless. The woman staring back at me was broken. My gray hair, which I always keep in a neat bun, was loose and disheveled. Strands stuck to the sweat on my forehead. My face. My left cheek was red and swollen, the skin around my eye already starting to darken, a nasty purple bruise forming. And my lip, it was split, puffy dried blood forming a dark crust in the corner of my mouth. I raised my hand and touched the bruised cheek with my fingertips. The skin was hot, tender, and as I touched it, I didn't just feel the physical pain. I felt the humiliation, the shame. That mark on my face wasn't just a bruise. It was visible proof of my failure, the failure of a mother who didn't see the monster growing, the failure of a woman who let fear silence her. And it was right there, looking at that mark, that the sadness began to transform into something else. Something cold, hard, anger. But it wasn't a hot, explosive anger like Marcus's. It was a cold, calculating anger. An anger that didn't scream. It whispered. And what it whispered was, "Never again." I turned on the cold water tap. I cupped my hands and splashed the icy water on my face once, twice, 3 times. The water stung my cut lip, but it was a good pain. A pain that woke me up. I washed away the blood, the sweat, the tears. I dried my face with a hand towel, patting gently at the sore areas. And I looked in the mirror again. The broken woman was gone. The woman staring back now had steel in her eyes. There was pain there. Yes, a deep pain that might never go away. But there was no more fear. The fear had been burned away by that cold anger. In its place was resolve. A deadly calm. The calm of someone who's hit rock bottom and found that the ground was solid stone, and you could push off of it to climb back up. I thought about my options. I could do nothing. In the morning, I'd put on makeup to hide the bruise. I'd say I fell. Marcus might apologize with that weepy, sorry little boy voice he used. I'd pretend to accept it, and we'd go back to our routine of walking on eggshells until the next explosion. And the next. And the next. Until when? Until he pushed me harder. Until my head hit something in a way I didn't get up from. No. That option was dead and buried. I could pack a bag and leave, call my sister Patricia in Atlanta, ask for shelter, abandon my home, my memories, my life. Leave Marcus here to drown in his own bitterness and liquor. But this house was mine. It was my sweat, my husband's sweat, that paid for it. Why should I be the one to run? I'd done nothing wrong. I would not be the fugitive. So that only left the third option. The hardest one. The most painful one. The only one that felt like a real solution. The only one that could maybe save my life. And who knows, in some twisted, terrible way, his life too. I left the powder room. The kitchen was still a mess. My glasses on the floor near the reading chair. I picked them up. One of the lenses was cracked. I put them on anyway. The crack in the lens seemed symbolic of how I saw the world now. Everything was broken. I walked through the dark living room. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed louder now, marking the rhythm of my decision. I went to the phone, an old cordless phone that sits on a little table in the hall. One with big backlit buttons, one of those designed for older folks to make dialing easier. I'd bought it because my fingers sometimes get stiff from arthritis. I never thought I'd be so grateful for those big buttons, because my hands in that moment were shaking. Not from fear, but from nervous determination. I took the phone into the dining room. I sat in my chair at the head of the table, the same table where in a few hours everything would happen. I took a deep breath, and I made the first call. The night was still dark, but my mind had never been so clear. The plan began to form. Piece by piece. It wasn't a plan for revenge. It was a plan for survival. I didn't want to destroy my son. I needed to stop the monster he'd become. And if to do that I had to break his heart and my own into 1,000 pieces, then so be it. Some hearts need to be broken, so the light can get in. I was sitting in the darkness of the dining room, the cordless phone heavy in my hand. The silence of the house was almost absolute, broken only by the steady sound of rain and the electric hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I looked at the illuminated buttons on the handset. Each number seemed like a challenge. To dial meant to make it all real. It meant crossing a point of no return. For a second, the mother inside me, the one who gave birth, who nursed, who stayed up all night with fevers, hesitated. A weak voice whispered in the back of my mind. "That's your boy, Eleanor. Your only child. You can't do this to him." But then the pain in my head throbbed, sharp, and the taste of blood returned to my mouth. The hesitation vanished like smoke. That man upstairs, snoring in the room I'd so lovingly decorated, was not my boy anymore. My boy wouldn't throw me against a cabinet. My boy wouldn't raise a hand to me. That man was a dangerous stranger, and I needed to protect myself from him. I took a deep breath and dialed the first number. My fingers trembled slightly, but I pressed each button firmly. The sound of the ringing, that steady tone, sounded absurdly loud in the quiet house. It was almost 4 in the morning. I was calling to wake up a 73-year-old, retired federal judge. On the other end, on the third ring, a sleepy but instantly sharp and authoritative voice answered. "Hello, Dorothy, it's me. Eleanor. I'm so sorry to call at this hour, my dear." There was a pause. I heard her stirring, the sound of fabric rustling. The sleepiness in her voice vanished, replaced by immediate concern. "Eleanor? For heaven's sake, what's happened? Are you all right? Is it Marcus?" Mrs. Dorothy Johnson. My neighbor for over 40 years, we'd watched our children grow up together, buried our husbands within months of each other, shared countless cups of tea on the porch, but Dorothy was more than a friend. Before she retired, she was one of the most respected judges in South Carolina. A black woman who'd broken barriers, who'd faced the system, and won. Her mind was as sharp as a razor, and her presence commanded respect that few people could match. If there was anyone in the world who would understand the complexity of my situation, the mix of love and terror, it was her. I swallowed hard. The shame burned my throat. "I need you, Dorothy. It happened again, but this time it was worse." I didn't need to say anything else. I heard her exhale on the other end, a heavy sigh, not of surprise, but of deep sadness, of confirmation. "Did he hurt you, Eleanor?" The tears welled up in my eyes again, but my voice stayed steady. "Yes, call the police," she said without hesitation. It wasn't a question, it was a command. "I'm going to," I answered. "But first, I need to ask you something. I know it's a lot to ask, but could you come over for breakfast at 8 o'clock sharp?" Another pause. I could almost feel the gears of that brilliant mind turning. She didn't ask why I wanted to serve breakfast in a situation like this. She understood. She understood this wasn't about food. It was about bearing witness. It was about authority. Eleanor, I'm not coming for breakfast. Her voice turned hard as steel. I'm coming to hold court. Where is your son now? Sleeping. Drunk in his room. I whispered. Good, she said. Let him sleep. Don't talk to him. Don't make a sound. Just do what you need to do. I'll be there at 8. And Eleanor? Yes? You're doing the right thing. The hardest thing and the rightest thing. I'm proud of you. When she hung up, I felt a wave of relief, so strong my legs went weak. I wasn't alone anymore. The cavalry was coming, and my cavalry wore an impeccable pantsuit and had the U.S. Constitution memorized. I took a deep breath, gathered my strength, and dialed the second number. The Charleston Police Department. A tired night shift operator answered. Charleston PD. What's your emergency? It's not exactly an emergency, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and even. My name is Eleanor Mitchell. I'd like to speak with Detective James Williams if possible. Ma'am, it's 4:30 in the morning. Detective Williams is off duty. I know, I insisted, with a firmness that surprised even myself. We attend the same church, Mount Zion Baptist. Please, I need you to contact him. It's regarding a domestic violence situation. I'm the victim. The shift in the operator's tone was immediate. The bureaucracy gave way to urgency. One moment, ma'am. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs. Detective James Williams. A good man. A deacon at our church. He'd known Marcus since he was a boy in the youth choir. He'd watched Marcus grow, watched him become a man, but he was also a cop, a man of the law. I wasn't calling Brother James, the deacon. I was calling Detective Williams, the officer, and I needed him to act like one. After a few minutes that felt like hours, James's deep, familiar voice came on the line, thick with sleep and concern. Sister Eleanor, what's going on? Are you safe? And then, for the second time that night, I had to tell it. I had to put my shame into words. James, Marcus assaulted me. He came home drunk and he hit me. My voice broke on the last word. I heard a rustling sound in the background, like he was getting out of bed, pulling on clothes in a hurry. Where is he now, Sister Eleanor? Is he still there? Do you need me to send a car right now? No, I said too quickly. He's sleeping. I'm safe for now. James, I don't want them to come now. I don't want a scene in the middle of the night with sirens and lights waking up the whole neighborhood. I want to do this my way, with dignity. He was silent, processing. I knew I was asking for something outside protocol. I have a plan, I continued. Mrs. Dorothy Johnson will be here at 8 o'clock in the morning. I want you to come too, James. You and 2 other officers. I want you to walk in, sit down, and we're going to handle this like civilized people. Before you take him, James sighed. The sigh of a man torn between his duty and his affection for my family. Sister Eleanor, that's highly irregular. I know it is, James, but you know me. You know Marcus. You know if a squad car shows up here with sirens blazing, he'll react badly. He'll fight. He'll scream. It'll turn into a circus. I don't want that. I want him to look me in the eye. I want him to look Mrs. Dorothy in the eye. And I want him to look you in the eye, James. I want him to understand what he's done. I don't want him to be just another drunk being dragged out of his house. I want him to feel the weight of his community's disappointment. Do you understand? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I understand, Sister Eleanor. 8 o'clock sharp. We'll be there. Just lock yourself in your room to be safe. And if he wakes up, if he tries anything, you call me immediately. Understood? Understood, James. And thank you. God bless you, Sister Eleanor, he said, and hung up. 2 calls made. 1 to go. The most personal one. I dialed the area code for Atlanta. My sister Patricia answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. Eleanor, I felt it. I knew it was you. What did he do? Patricia and I have always had that connection. She knew. She always knew. I told her everything. The broken figurine, the yelling, the shove, the slap. She listened in silence, with just the sound of her breathing on the other end of the line. When I finished, she didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't say, "You should have left a long time ago." She just said, her voice thick with anger and love, "What are you going to do?" "I've called Dorothy and Detective James. They're coming at 8, I said, my voice now sounding exhausted. "I'm turning him in, Patricia." A sob escaped her. "Oh, Eleanor, my dear sister, I'm so sorry." "I know," I said. I wanted you to know. I wanted someone in our family to know what I'm doing, so that if I ever doubt myself, you can remind me of today, of this night." "I'll remember," she promised. "I'm getting the first bus to Charleston in the morning. I'll be there by afternoon." "Thank you. Take care of yourself, Eleanor. And know this, you are the strongest woman I know." I hung up the phone, placed the handset back in its cradle. The 3 calls were made, the 3 pillars of my plan were in place: moral authority, the law, and family. I felt a deep weariness, an exhaustion that came from the soul, but at the same time I felt light, as if a 2-ton weight had been lifted off my back, the weight of silence. I looked at the clock. Almost 6 in the morning. The sky outside was beginning to lighten from deep black to a bruised bluish gray. The storm had passed. I had 2 hours. 2 hours to finish preparing breakfast. 2 hours to get myself ready. 2 hours to prepare for the final battle. I went to the kitchen and started making the peach preserves. Justice, after all, was going to be served. And it would have a bittersweet taste. The gray morning light started to filter through the kitchen windows, revealing the silent chaos of my vigil. There was a dusting of flour on the floor, dirty bowls in the sink, and the sweet, heavy smell of muffins hanging in the air. The sky outside was pale, washed clean by the night's rain. It was the calm after the storm, and I felt that same calm inside me, a strange, cold calm, but an unshakable one. The exhaustion weighed on my shoulders like a shroud, but my mind was sharper than ever. Less than 2 hours to go. I needed to finish setting the stage. It wasn't enough to just have law and order on my side. Marcus needed to understand what he was losing. He needed to see, in a concrete way, the home he was destroying, the mother he was throwing away. His punishment wouldn't just be legal. It had to be visual, emotional. I started cleaning the kitchen with renewed energy. I washed the dishes, scrubbing each bowl and mixing spoon with a force like I was scouring the filth from my own soul. I dried everything and put it away. I wiped the flour from the counter and the floor. The kitchen, in 20 minutes, was spotless, gleaming in the morning light, as if the violence and despair of the night had never happened. It was a facade. A beautiful, orderly facade, just like the life I'd been leading for the past 2 years. Then I turned to the food. The muffins were already done, dozens of them, piled on a white ceramic platter. I went to the pantry and got a jar of peaches in syrup. I opened it and poured the contents into a saucepan, adding some brown sugar, a dash of cinnamon, and some freshly grated nutmeg. As the peaches bubbled on the stove, the sweet and spicy aroma mixed with the buttery smell of the muffins. It was the smell of Marcus's childhood. When he was a boy and got sick, I'd make him these same preserves to eat with toast. He used to call it his sweet medicine. The irony of it. I was preparing the most bitter medicine of his life, and he didn't even know it. While the preserves thickened, I put a large pot of water and salt on to boil for the grits. Creamy grits, with plenty of butter and a little bit of sharp cheddar stirred in at the end. Soul food. Food for the soul. But right then, it felt more like food for a condemned man. A last meal. As the water boiled, I focused on an important detail: the knives. I had a set of kitchen knives Thomas had given me for a birthday many years ago. But last year, the wooden handle on my favorite chef's knife had cracked. Patricia, always thoughtful, sent me a new set as a gift from some German brand, high-quality steel, in a heavy wooden block. "So you can chop your vegetables easier, sis," she joked. I kept them razor sharp. I took the paring knife from that block. The blade gleamed. I used it to slice some fresh fruit to garnish the table: strawberries, cantaloupe. Every cut was precise, clean. I moved with the skill of a woman who'd spent her life in the kitchen. But that morning, there was something else in my movements. A surgical precision, like a doctor preparing for a delicate operation on which a patient's life depended. And in a way, my life did depend on what was about to happen. With the food almost ready, it was time to set the table. I went to the china cabinet, the very one I'd been thrown against. I ran my hand over the dark wood, feeling the solid texture, the history in it. I opened the glass doors carefully. The smell of old wood and lemon polish filled my senses. Inside was my heritage, my wedding china, my mother's crystal glasses. First, the tablecloth. I went to the linen closet in the hall and took out my best one, white pure linen with delicate embroidery, handmade by my grandmother. I used it so rarely, it still smelled of the lavender sachets I kept with it. I spread it over the dining room table. The stark white fabric covered the dark wood, creating a striking contrast, a blank canvas for the scene that was to come. Then the china. I went back to the cabinet, and with reverent care, took out the dinner set: plates, saucers, cups. Each piece was white, with a thin gold rim, and tiny hand-painted roses. I washed them in the sink one by one, to remove any dust, and dried them with a soft cloth. I set 4 places at the table, one at the head for me, one to my right for Mrs. Dorothy, one to my left for Detective James, and one at the other end, facing me, Marcus's place. I placed the silver cutlery, which I'd polished the week before, next to each plate. White linen napkins, ironed crisp, folded neatly, a small crystal vase with a single white gardenia from my garden in the center of the table. The table was set for a king, or for a sacrifice. The line between the two, I was discovering, was very thin. Everything was ready. The food, the table. Now it was my turn. I went upstairs, the steps creaking under my feet. The upstairs hallway was dark and quiet. I walked past Marcus's door. I could hear him snoring, a heavy, guttural sound. The sound of a man sleeping the sleep of the unaware, with no idea of the earthquake about to shatter his life. For a brief second, I felt a pang of pity, an almost overwhelming urge to open that door, to shake him awake, to scream, "Wake up, my son. Wake up before it's too late." But I didn't. I took a deep breath and continued to my room. I entered my sanctuary. My room was simple, tidy. The patchwork quilt I'd made myself was on the bed. The white lace curtains filtered the gray morning light. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the large mirror. The sight was still shocking. The bruise under my eye was darker now, an ugly smudge of blue and purple, my lip more swollen. I needed a shower. I needed to wash the smell of fear and flour from my body. I turned on the tub faucet and let the hot water run. I added some lavender bath salts, and the fragrant steam filled the bathroom. While the tub filled, I went to my closet. I didn't hesitate. I went straight to the back, where I kept the clothes I rarely wore, and I took out the dress. It was a Sunday dress made of crepe in a deep navy blue. It had long sleeves, a modest neckline, and fell straight to mid-calf. It was an elegant, sober dress. The kind of dress you wear to church or to a funeral, or, as I was about to find out, to a judgment. I took my bath. The hot water stung my bruised back, but it also relaxed my tense muscles. I washed my hair, scrubbing my scalp thoroughly. I tried not to think. I just focused on the sensations, the water, the soap, the steam. I got out, dried myself off, and put on the navy dress. It fit perfectly. I combed my wet hair and pinned it into a low, tight bun at the nape of my neck. I looked in the mirror again. The bruise and the cut lips stood out even more against my clean skin and the dark fabric of the dress, and that's exactly what I wanted. I wasn't going to hide a thing. My wounds were my witnesses. I sat at my vanity. I don't wear much makeup, just a little powder and some lipstick. but that morning I made a point of it. I dusted my face with translucent powder. And then I opened the drawer and took out something I kept for special occasions. A back support belt. One of those medical ones, discreet and skin-toned, to wear under clothes. I'd bought it online some time ago for the days when my arthritis acted up badly. I put it on under the dress, pulling it snug. It gave my back immediate support, easing the pain from the blow against the china cabinet. And more importantly, it forced me to keep my posture straight. I would not slouch. Not today. I looked at the clock on my bedside table. 7:40. It was almost time. I went downstairs. The house was filled with aromas and a silent expectation. I poured the fresh coffee into a porcelain pot, the grits into a serving dish, the preserves into a crystal bowl. I carried everything to the dining room table. Everything was perfect. Dangerously perfect. I sat down in my chair at the head of the table. I smoothed the navy dress over my knees. My hands were calm now. My heart was beating in a steady, slow rhythm. I was ready. And that's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps upstairs. The creak of floorboards in Marcus's room. He was awake. The guest of honor was about to come down for his feast. The sound of footsteps upstairs was unmistakable. First, the groan of the bed. A heavy, lazy sound. Then the shuffling of feet on the floor. I knew that routine by heart. It was the sound of a hangover, the sound of a man moving through a fog of headache and shallow regret. I stayed seated, motionless, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the texture of my dress. My heart didn't speed up, my breathing didn't change. I was the picture of serenity, a calm statue sitting at the head of a war table. I heard the water run in the upstairs bathroom. A quick shower. He always did that, as if water could wash away, not just the grime from his body, but the filth from his soul. Foolish man! His filth was bone deep. The footsteps started again, now coming down the stairs one step at a time. Heavy, deliberate. The staircase in our house is old, solid wood, and each step has its own unique groan. I knew them like I knew the notes of a hymn. I could tell just by the sound where he was. Halfway down, 3 steps to go. Now, in the front hall. There was a pause. I knew what he was seeing. The entry table and the broken shards of my porcelain figurine on the floor. I hadn't cleaned it up, I'd left it on purpose. I wanted it to be the first thing he saw, the physical evidence of his nighttime rage. I'd hoped it might bring him a sliver of shame, of remorse. But what I heard next wasn't a sigh of regret. It was a huff, a sound of disdain. And then I heard the sound of the shards being kicked aside with the toe of his shoe. Carelessly, like it was just trash. In that moment, any lingering shred of pity I might have had for him evaporated. All that was left was the coldness of my resolve. And then he appeared in the dining room doorway. He stood there, his hand on the doorframe, and blinked, adjusting to the light. The morning sun, still weak, was streaming through the large window, illuminating the set table. He was dressed in wrinkled khaki pants and a polo shirt that had seen better days. His hair was still damp from the shower, but his face was puffy, his eyes red and small. The stubble on his chin gave him an air of slovenliness, of defeat. He took in the scene, the white embroidered tablecloth, the fine china, the gleaming silver cutlery, the steaming platters of food, the smell of coffee, muffins, peaches, and cinnamon. He scanned it all, and a look of confusion settled on his face. He was expecting yelling, accusations, or at best, my silent treatment. My cold shoulder. He wasn't prepared for this inexplicable celebration. He looked at me, and for the first time that morning, he seemed to really notice my face. I saw his eyes fix for a second on my swollen lip, on the bruise blooming on my cheek. But his reaction wasn't shock or guilt. It was an almost imperceptible twitch of his lips, a glimmer of satisfaction, of power, and then the confusion on his face morphed into something else. Arrogance. A slow, crooked smile spread across his face. He'd read it all wrong. In his sick mind, this feast wasn't a trap, it was a peace offering. a white flag. In his mind, the slap from the night before had worked. He'd finally tamed me. He'd put me in my place. And now, like a good, submissive mother, I was appeasing him, apologizing with food. The sight was so absurd, so twisted from reality, that I almost would have laughed if it wasn't so tragic. "Well, well," he said, his voice still hoarse from the hangover. He straightened up, puffing out his chest, and walked to the table, like a king surveying his domain. "To what do I owe the honor of this grand feast?" I didn't answer. I just watched him, keeping my expression neutral. My silence seemed to amuse him even more. He pulled out his chair, the one at the opposite end from me, and threw himself into it with a thud. He picked up the linen napkin, looked at it with fake sophistication, and tossed it in his lap. Then he reached out and took a muffin from the basket. The most perfect one, the most golden one. He held it up for a moment, admiring it. "I've got to admit, Mom, nobody makes muffins like you." And then he took a huge bite. He ate with his mouth open, no manners, crumbs falling onto the pristine tablecloth. He chewed loudly, and after he swallowed, he pointed what was left of the muffin at me. "There you go, Mom," he said, his voice full of that cruel victory. "See? You finally figured out who's in charge around here, huh? A little discipline, and things fall right back into place. That's how it's got to be." His words hit me, but I didn't show it. On the outside, I was a statue of ice. On the inside, every word he spoke was another nail in the coffin of my old life. He felt no remorse. He felt pride. Pride in having hurt me. Pride in having humiliated me. He believed violence was the answer. I just stared at him from across the table. The silence stretched. He shrugged and picked up his coffee cup. He was about to pour himself some, when the sound cut through the air. Ding dong, the sound of the doorbell. Sharp, clear, punctual. Marcus stopped, his hand hovering over the coffee pot. A scowl of irritation formed on his forehead. "Who the hell is that at this time of morning? Did you invite someone?" "Yes," I said. And it was the first word I'd spoken that morning. My voice came out calm, steady. "I did." "You what?" he growled, slamming the cup down on its saucer. "I don't want to see anyone. Send them away, whoever it is." I ignored his command. With a slow, deliberate movement, I placed my hands on the table, pushed myself up, and stood. I smoothed the front of my navy dress, and I walked, without hurrying, out of the dining room, and toward the front hall. "Mom, didn't you hear me?" His voice followed me, full of anger at my disobedience. I said, "Send them away." I didn't look back. I just kept walking. My shoes made a soft sound on the hardwood floor. I reached the front door. I took one last deep breath. I looked at my distorted reflection in the glass. The woman in navy with the bruised face and the posture of a queen. It was time. I turned the brass knob and pulled the door open. The Charleston morning air drifted in, fresh and damp. On my porch stood the three people I was expecting. Mrs. Dorothy Johnson, immaculate in her cream-colored linen suit, wearing a string of pearls and a serious expression that would make any lawyer tremble. Beside her, Detective James Williams, tall and imposing in his uniform, his cap held in his hand, his face grim with concern and duty. And behind him, two younger officers, both with professional, neutral expressions. I looked at Dorothy. She looked at my face, at my lip, at my eye. I saw a flash of fury in her eyes, but she controlled it instantly. She just gave me a nod, an almost imperceptible movement, but it said everything. "I'm here. We're here. Good morning, Eleanor," she said, her voice as firm as a judge's in a courtroom. "Good morning, Dorothy." "Detective," I said, my voice just as steady. "Please come in. The coffee is served." I stepped back from the door, holding it open for them. They entered in silence. One by one, their presence filled my small hallway. Authority. The law. They walked behind me, toward the dining room. Marcus, who'd gotten up, annoyed, to see what was going on, was standing in the doorway of the room, and that's when his world fell apart. When he saw the group walking in, when he saw Mrs. Dorothy with her courtroom bearing, When he saw the uniform on Detective James and the other two officers, his jaw dropped. The arrogance melted away like sugar in rain. His face went from annoyed to confused, and from confused to the purest, most absolute panic. The color drained from his skin, leaving behind that sickly grayish tone of sheer fear. His wide eyes jumped from me to them and back to me. He opened his mouth to say something, but no sound came out. His hand, which was still holding a piece of the muffin, went limp. The muffin fell. It hit the china plate with a dry clink, then rolled onto the floor, breaking into crumbs. A tiny sound, the sound of the end of his reign. The silence in the dining room was so thick, it felt like it had weight. The only sound was the slow, steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the next room. Each second, marking Marcus's agony. He was frozen in place, his face a gray mask of terror. His eyes, wide and disbelieving, darted from one face to another like a cornered animal looking for an escape route where there was none. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw in his eyes, not anger or contempt, but a terrified question. "Mom, what have you done?" I didn't have to answer. Mrs. Dorothy Johnson did it for me with her actions. With a calm that was both terrifying and magnificent, she took a step forward. She completely ignored Marcus's presence, as if he were an unimportant piece of furniture. She walked with her usual elegance to the dining room table. Her low-heeled shoes made a soft, determined sound on the hardwood floor. She didn't go to the place I'd set for her, to my right. No. She went straight to the chair at the head of the table, facing me. The chair Marcus had just abandoned. The chair that by right and tradition belonged to the head of the family. My Thomas's chair. She pulled out the heavy wooden chair with a smooth movement, the scraping sound echoing in the room. She sat down. She straightened the jacket of her linen suit. She placed her leather purse on the floor beside her. And then she looked at Marcus. Just looked. There was no anger in her gaze. No pity. There was only the weight of 60 years of friendship with me, and the weight of a lifetime spent upholding the law. It was a look that stripped the soul bare. Under that gaze, Marcus seemed to shrink. The big imposing man who'd thrown me against the wall hours before now looked like an awkward, frightened boy lost in a grown-up's world. Detective James and the other two officers remained standing in the doorway, positioned strategically. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. Their presence, the dark blue uniforms, the belts with their holstered weapons, spoke for itself. They were the consequence, the physical and legal answer to the violence of the night. Mrs. Dorothy, still without taking her eyes off my son, reached out and took the porcelain coffee pot. "This coffee smells wonderful, Eleanor," she said, her voice calm and velvety, as if she were commenting on the weather at an afternoon tea. She poured herself a cup, the dark steaming liquid, filling the white china. She took the small cream pitcher and added a drop. She stirred the coffee with a silver spoon, the gentle clinking of metal against porcelain cutting through the tension. She took a sip. Then she placed the cup back on its saucer with calculated delicacy. Finally, she spoke to Marcus. "Marcus," she began, and her voice was low, but it carried an authority that filled every corner of the room. "I remember when you were just a little boy, you used to come running to my fence with a dandelion in your hand, and you'd say, 'Look, Miss Dorothy, a flower for you.'" Marcus swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. "I remember," she continued, "you carrying my grocery bags from the market, even when they were almost bigger than you were. You were such a polite boy. So kind. Let me get that, Miss Dorothy. You shouldn't be straining yourself. That's what you always used to say." She paused, taking another sip of coffee. Every word she spoke was a small blow, a reminder of the man he should have been, in stark contrast to the man he'd become. It wasn't an accusation. It was a eulogy. "Your father," she said, and Thomas's name seemed to hang in the air, "would have been so proud of that boy. The boy who became a man, went to college, the first in the family, the pride of our community, the pride of his mother." She paused and glanced at me. Then her eyes returned to Marcus, and the softness in her voice was gone, replaced by a blade of steel. "Where did he go, Marcus? Where's that man? Marcus opened his mouth. A hoarse sound, a groan, escaped. Miss Dorothy, I don't know what you're talking about. This is just a family misunderstanding. It was the wrong thing to say. Mrs. Dorothy's eyes narrowed. A family misunderstanding? She repeated, her voice dripping with irony. She gestured with her chin in my direction. Look at your mother's face, Marcus. Look closely. That mark on her lip. The bruise forming under her eye, does that look like a misunderstanding to you? He couldn't look. His eyes fell to the floor, to the crumbs of the muffin he'd dropped. No. Mrs. Dorothy's voice was sharp now. That has a name and we both know what it is. That was Detective James's cue. He stepped forward, pulling a small notepad from his uniform pocket. His presence was imposing. He looked at Marcus with an expression of profound disappointment. Marcus Mitchell, James said, his voice grave and official, without the warmth of Brother James from church. We've received multiple complaints of disturbing the peace from your neighbors over the last 6 months. Loud noise, late-night music, shouting. Marcus hunched his shoulders, still staring at the floor. We also have a record, the detective continued, flipping a page in his notepad, of an altercation at Murphy's Bar 3 weeks ago. You were involved in a fight and had to be restrained by security. You were released with a warning. Marcus's head came up a little, surprised that he knew about that. And we have 2 reports, not yet confirmed, of reckless driving after leaving said bar. In short, Marcus, you've been on our radar. James paused, and his gaze grew even more serious. And then this morning, at 4:37 a.m., I received a phone call, a domestic assault complaint from this address. The victim, your mother, Eleanor Mitchell. Every word from the detective was a nail being hammered. The list of his failures, his transgressions, being read aloud in his childhood dining room, in front of the woman who was like a second mother to him. The humiliation was palpable. The air was thick with it. I stood up. All eyes turned to me. My back was aching, but the support belt I'd put on under my dress kept me upright. I would not falter. Not now. I walked slowly around the table until I was standing next to Mrs. Dorothy's chair. I placed my hand on her shoulder, and I felt the solidity, the support, and then I looked at my son, not at the floor, not at the wall, straight into his eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, I was the one who made him look away. Marcus, I began. My voice was calm, but there was no warmth in it. It was the voice of a woman who'd walked through hell during the night and come out the other side. I needed him to understand. This wasn't about hate. It was about something much more complicated. I'd put on lipstick before coming downstairs, a deep burgundy lipstick with a matte finish. My niece had sent it to me as a gift. She'd said it was long-lasting, that it wouldn't even come off if you drank water. I'd put it on that morning for a reason. I didn't want them to see my lips tremble. I wanted my mouth to be firm, strong, when I delivered his sentence. I didn't call them here out of hate, Marcus, I said, the color of the lipstick making every word stand out. I called them because I love you, he snorted, a sound of scorn. You love me? You call the cops on someone you love? Sometimes, I replied without blinking. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't protecting someone from the consequences of their actions. It's delivering them to them. The room fell silent again. The only thing moving was the steam rising from the coffee cups, like souls ascending to heaven. The trap was set. The witnesses were in place. The law was present. And now it was the victim's time to speak. Marcus's scornful laugh hung in the air for a second, thin and brittle, before it died under the weight of my gaze. You call this love? He repeated, his voice rising an octave, bordering on hysterical. This is betrayal. You're turning me over to strangers. This is a family matter, Mom. Our business. No, Marcus. Mrs. Dorothy's voice cut through the air, cold and precise as a scalpel. She didn't even bother to look at him. She continued to sip her coffee as if discussing a trivial matter. It stopped being a family matter the moment you raised your hand to the woman who gave you life. At that instant, it became a community matter, a legal matter. And if I may say so, She finally set her cup down and fixed her eyes on him. It became my matter. The power in those last words silenced Marcus instantly. Arguing with me was one thing. Arguing with Judge Dorothy Johnson was something else entirely. He shut his mouth. His face twisted in a mixture of anger and fear. I remained standing next to Dorothy, my hand still on her shoulder. I felt as if I were drawing strength from her, courage from her. I looked at my son, the frightened man-child across the table, and the torrent of words I'd held back for 2 years finally found a way out. A family matter, I repeated, my voice low, but every syllable weighted with pain. You want to talk about family, Marcus? Let's talk. Family is your father, Thomas, working from sunup to sundown at that port. His hands covered in calluses, his back aching, to make sure you had books for school and food on this very table. That's family. I took a step, moving around Dorothy's chair, getting a little closer to him. Family? My son is me. After your father was gone, working as a seamstress until my fingers bled, and then going to clean offices downtown, coming home in the dead of night, just to make sure your college tuition was paid, to make sure you'd have a better future than we did. That's family. He shrank back in his chair, unable to meet my gaze. And you? I continued, my voice beginning to tremble, not with weakness, but with righteous anger finally breaking free. What did you do with this family? You took your father's sacrifice and my sacrifice, and you spat on it. You took the pain of your demotion, your frustration, your inability to deal with life's problems like a man, and you turned it into a weapon, and you aimed that weapon at me, the only person in the world who never ever gave up on you. The tears began to stream down my face, but I didn't care. I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall like liquid witnesses to my pain. Night after night, Marcus, night after night, I sit in that kitchen and I pray. But my prayers have changed. I used to pray for your safety, for your success. Now I pray that you'll come home and go straight to bed without speaking to me. I pray that your poison won't touch me. I pray to be invisible in my own home. You turned my home into a prison. You turned my mother's love into a life sentence. I didn't mean to hurt you, he stammered, finally looking up. There were tears in his eyes too, but they were tears of self-pity. I drank too much. I lost control. It won't happen again, Mom. I swear to God. Oh, no, 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 I said, shaking my head slowly. Don't you use God's name in this house, not today. How many times have I heard that promise, Marcus? Huh? How many hungover mornings have you woken up crying, begging for my forgiveness? And I, like a fool, believed you every single time. I forgave you. I cleaned up your messes. I lied to the neighbors. I hid my tears. I protected you. I leaned over the table, my knuckles resting on the embroidered tablecloth. And you know what my forgiveness did? You know what my protection did? It gave you permission. My silence, my forgiveness. They told you it was okay, that you could yell, that you could break things, you could humiliate me. And last night, they told you that you could hit me. The word hit hung in the air, ugly and irrefutable. And you know what the worst part is, Marcus? I went on, my voice now a hoarse whisper. It wasn't the pain. The physical pain goes away. The bruise will fade. The lip will heal. The worst part was your silence afterward. The way you turned your back and went upstairs like you'd just stepped on a bug. Your total and complete lack of remorse. It was right there, in your silence, that I understood. I understood that I wasn't dealing with my son having a bad day anymore. I was dealing with a man who took pleasure in inflicting pain on someone weaker. And that person was me. I straightened up. I glanced at Detective James. His face was impassive, but I saw the pain in his eyes. He was a father of 2 daughters. He understood. I carried you for 9 months, Marcus, I said, turning my gaze back to my son. I raised you. I gave you my life. And my mother's love is the strongest thing I have. But my love does not require me to be your punching bag. My love does not require me to be an accomplice to your destruction. And protecting you from yourself at this point is exactly that. It's helping you destroy yourself and taking me down with you. He started to cry for real now. Loud, childish sobs. Mom, please don't do this. I'll go to rehab. I'll stop drinking. I'll go back to church. Anything, but don't let them take me. Please. It's a family matter. The law is clear on domestic assault, Marcus. Detective James's voice sounded calm, but final. It's not something we can ignore. What will the neighbors say? Marcus whimpered, in a last pathetic attempt to appeal to my shame. And that's when I looked down at my watch. A delicate gold wristwatch that used to be Thomas's. I wore it every day. I looked at the time. 8:15. I looked at Marcus and said, I don't care what the neighbors will say anymore. I've spent the last 2 years caring about that. And look where we are. From today on, I only care about my peace. And my peace, Marcus, begins with your absence from this house. I sat down in my chair again. I picked up my linen napkin, and with perfectly steady hands, I served myself a spoonful of grits. I wasn't going to eat. Not really. My stomach was a knot of anguish. But the act was symbolic. I was taking back my life. My table. My house. Mrs. Dorothy, seeing my gesture, nodded slowly. She turned to Marcus, his face a mess of tears and mucus. Your tears don't move me, boy, she said, her voice without a shred of sympathy. An abuser's tears are always about himself, never about the pain he's caused. Your mother, by doing this, is giving you the only chance you have. The chance to face the man in the mirror without the excuse of the bottle, without the shield of her easy forgiveness. She's forcing you to grow up, and that, Marcus, is the greatest, most painful and truest act of love you will ever receive. She turned to Detective James and gave a slight nod of her head. It was the signal. The trial at the dining room table was over. The sentence was about to be carried out. Mrs. Dorothy's nod was almost imperceptible, but to Detective James it was as clear as the sound of a judge's gavel. He put his notepad away in his uniform pocket, and the small gesture marked the end of the conversation and the beginning of the action. He took a step forward, fully entering the dining room. The younger officer who'd been posted near the door followed him. The air in the room, which was already heavy, became thin. I felt my chest tighten. It was real. It was happening. Marcus. Detective James's voice was formal, devoid of any warmth. He was no longer Brother James from church. He was the law. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back. Marcus's crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a look of panic and disbelief. He looked from James to me and back to James. You can't be serious, he stammered. James, for God's sake, you've known me since I was a kid. You saw me get baptized. And you're going to arrest me? In my own house? In front of my mother? I'm arresting you because of your mother, Marcus, James replied, his voice firm, unwavering. And because the law requires me to. Now please don't make this any harder than it already is. The second officer moved up behind Marcus's chair. The movement was what finally seemed to break my son's trance. The panic turned to rage. He shoved his chair back with a loud bang and jumped to his feet, his face red with anger. Don't you touch me, he yelled, pointing a finger at the officer. This is absurd. It's a family matter. She's my mother. We fight sometimes. Everybody fights. He turned to me, his eyes pleading and furious at the same time. Mom, tell them to stop. It was just an argument. I lost my temper. Tell them you don't want to press charges. Everyone in the room looked at me. His question hung in the air. The last chance for me to back down, to go back to being the protective mother, the fearful woman. For a second, my heart faltered. To see my son, my baby, in this situation, cornered, desperate. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to endure. I was holding a silk scarf in my hand, a scarf with a rose print that Thomas had given me. I'd grabbed it from my dresser before coming downstairs, anticipating tears, and now I was clutching it so tightly in my hand that my knuckles were white. The thin fabric was damp, not with the tears I'd shed, but with the ones I'd held back. I looked at Marcus, at his contorted face. and I found my voice. "I've said everything I have to say, Marcus." My voice came out low but clear. "I'm not going to lie for you. Not anymore." Those words were the final sentence. Marcus's face crumbled. The anger gave way to abject despair. He seemed to deflate as if his spine had been removed. He knew he'd lost. "Please," he whispered, his voice broken. "Don't do this." Detective James didn't wait any longer. With a swift, practiced move, he took Marcus's arm and turned him around. The younger officer took the other hand, and then I heard the sound, the metallic, dry sound of steel teeth locking together. Click, the sound of handcuffs, the sound of freedom for me, and the sound of rock bottom for him. Marcus let out a sob, a guttural sound of pure defeat. He didn't resist anymore. He just stood there, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped, as Detective James read him his rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The detective's voice was a monotone drone, the familiar litany I'd only ever heard in movies and on television. To hear it in my own dining room, being read to my own son, was surreal. Mrs. Dorothy didn't move. She remained seated, a silent and regal witness. Her presence, an anchor of dignity in the chaos of my life. She was proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't overreacting. They started to escort him out of the room. As Marcus passed by me, he stopped for an instant. He lifted his head and looked me in the eye. His face was wet with tears. "Mama," he began. I thought he was going to apologize, but no. "You're going to regret this, Mama," he said, his voice low, full of poison that chilled my blood. "You're going to be all alone in this old house, with your old junk, and you're going to regret it." It was a threat, the last attempt of a tyrant to maintain control through fear. But the fear in me had died that morning. I met his gaze without flinching. I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing but a deep abysmal sadness. And pity. Pity for the weak man he'd become. "Maybe, Marcus," I replied, my voice steady, without a hint of hesitation. "Maybe I'll regret that it had to come to this, but I will never ever regret choosing my own life today." Detective James gently pulled him by the arm, and they continued walking. I watched as they crossed the front hall. The other officer opened the front door. The bright morning sun flooded the hallway, making me blink. I didn't go to the door. I didn't want to see the curious neighbors peering out their windows. I didn't want to see the look on my son's face as he was put into a police car. I stood just inside my dining room and just listened. I heard their footsteps on the wooden porch. I heard Detective James's voice saying something to him. And then I heard the sound of the police car door slamming shut. A hollow final sound. And then the sound of the engine starting, driving away, until it faded into the distance. And then the silence returned. But it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of the early morning. It was a light silence. Empty, yes. Painful, without a doubt. But light. It was the silence of peace. The silence of a house that no longer held fear. I just stood there for I don't know how long. My muscles, which had been tense for hours, began to relax. The adrenaline that had kept me on my feet started to dissipate, and a wave of exhaustion so overwhelming hit me. My knees buckled. Before I could fall, I felt a firm hand on my arm. It was Mrs. Dorothy. She'd gotten up and come to me. She held me steady, and the other officer, the one who'd stayed behind, came over and pulled out a chair for me. Dorothy helped me sit down. "It's over, Eleanor," she said, her voice soft for the first time that morning. "It's over." And it was only then, sitting there in my dining room with the smell of coffee and muffins still in the air, with my best friend beside me, that I allowed myself to fall apart. I covered my face with my hands and I wept. I wept for the loss of my son, for the shame, for the pain. I wept for the boy he once was, and the man he never became. I wept for the loneliness that lay ahead of me, and I wept, too, for the terrifying relief of being finally and absolutely free. The days that followed Marcus's arrest were the strangest of my life. The house suddenly felt enormous, cavernous. Every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the clock echoed in the emptiness he'd left behind. At first, I kept expecting to run into him around a corner. I'd expect to hear his heavy footsteps on the stairs, the sound of the TV turned up too loud on the sports channel, but there was nothing, just silence. A silence that, for the first few days, was as deafening as his yelling had been. Mrs. Dorothy and my sister Patricia, who arrived from Atlanta that same afternoon, formed a protective wall around me. Patricia cleaned up the mess in the kitchen, picking up the shards of my porcelain figurine with a look of quiet fury. "I'll glue every piece back together, Eleanor," she said. "But some things, once they're broken, are never the same." I knew she wasn't just talking about the figurine. Dorothy, for her part, handled the outside world. She spoke to the neighbors with a short, dignified version of the facts, cutting off any gossip at the root. Marcus is unwell and required a serious intervention. Eleanor was brave and did what had to be done. The family asks for privacy and prayers. The word of a retired federal judge, my dear, carries more weight than any porch gossip. They made me eat. Patricia made my favorite soups. Dorothy brought over slices of sweet potato pie, but the food had no taste. I felt numb, like I was floating outside my own body, watching some sad old woman move through her house. The hardest part was the nights. Lying in my bed in the absolute quiet of the upstairs, knowing that the room next door, my son's room, was empty. I would imagine where he was. In a cold cell at the county jail, with strangers, with criminals. The mother in me would scream. I felt like a traitor. I had nightmares. I dreamt he was a little boy again, crying behind bars and I couldn't reach him. I woke up several times with my face wet with tears. It was Dorothy who, on the third day, sat with me on the porch and gave me the harshest medicine. "Eleanor, stop," she said, her voice firm, but not without compassion. "Stop torturing yourself. You didn't put him there. His choices put him there. The liquor put him there. His anger put him there. You just opened the door so the consequences could walk in, and you only did that when your own life was at risk." She was right. I knew she was. But a mother's heart doesn't run on logic. It runs on a stubborn, sometimes blind love. That same week, I took the first step for my own safety. I had always been a woman who felt secure in her home. Never even locked my doors during the day. But Marcus's threat at the door, "You're going to regret this," had lodged itself in the back of my mind. I called a company I saw advertised online and had a security system installed. Discreet little cameras on the front and back porches, and an alarm with sensors on the doors and windows. The young technician who came to install it was very kind. He showed me how to arm and disarm the system with a small keypad by the door. The first night I pressed the buttons and heard the soft beep confirming the house was locked down. I breathed a little deeper. It was a small bit of control, but it was my control. My sense of security was no longer something that depended on someone else's mood. The second step was at the suggestion of Reverend Michael, from our church. He came to visit, brought me a book of Psalms, and talked with me for a long time. "Sister Eleanor," he said, "the body heals, but the soul needs a different kind of doctor." He gave me the card of a therapist, Dr. Simone Harris, a Black woman specializing in family trauma in the community. I hesitated. In my generation, we didn't do therapy. We talked to God, to our pastor, to our friends. But the world had changed, and I needed more help than hymns could give me. My first session with Dr. Simone was terrifying. I sat in her calm office with its comfortable chairs and the smell of lavender tea in the air, and I couldn't speak. The shame was a lump in my throat, but she was patient. She didn't push. She just sat there with me, in my silence, until finally, I started to cry. And after I cried, I started to talk. And I talked for a solid hour without stopping. I talked about my fear, my guilt, my love, my anger. And she listened. For the first time, I felt like someone was hearing me, without judging me. As I began my stumbling path to healing, Marcus was starting his. Because of the complaint and my testimony, he was charged with assault. His history of disturbing the peace didn't help him. Dorothy explained that for a first violence offense, he likely wouldn't get a long prison sentence, but that the court would almost certainly order him into a mandatory rehab program for alcohol and anger management. And that's exactly what happened. He stayed in the county jail for 3 weeks awaiting his hearing, and it was during that time that the letter arrived. It was a plain white envelope from the county jail. My name and address were written in his handwriting, which I'd know anywhere. My hands trembled as I took it from the mailbox. I sat in my reading chair on the porch to open it. The afternoon sun was warm on my shoulders. I opened the envelope carefully. The letter was short, written on a sheet of lined paper. Mom, I don't really know how to start this. I guess I'm sorry isn't enough. I've said and done unforgivable things. I know that now. These past 3 weeks in here, sober, with nothing to distract me, they've been the longest and clearest of my life. I've had to look at the man I've become, and I didn't like what I saw. I saw a bitter, weak man who blamed everyone for his problems, especially the one person who loved him most. I don't remember everything from that night, but I remember enough. And the image of your face, the fear in your eyes, I'll never forget that. I hate myself for causing you that. When they put the cuffs on me, I hated you. I blamed you. But in here, in this quiet, I understood. You didn't do that to me. You did that for me. You hit the emergency button because the plane was going down and I was too busy fighting with the flight attendant. You stopped me. And maybe, as crazy as it sounds, you saved my life. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand. Thank you for having the courage I didn't have. Marcus, I read the letter 2-3 times. The tears ran down my face and dripped onto the paper, blurring the ink. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of hope, relief. I don't quite know. It was the first time in over 2 years that I'd heard my son's real voice. Not the voice of the drunken monster, but the voice of the man who was lost inside. The voice of the boy who once promised me he'd make his father proud. He still had a long road ahead. The court sentenced him to 6 months in an inpatient rehab program, followed by a year of probation and mandatory therapy. 6 months. It felt like an eternity, but for the first time, I felt there was a light at the end of the tunnel. A long, dark, scary tunnel, but there was a light. In the months that followed, I focused on myself. I continued my therapy with Dr. Simone. I rejoined the church sewing circle. I started having Mrs. Dorothy over for tea again. Slowly, my house started to feel like a home again. Not a prison. The silence was no longer scary. It was peaceful. I bought a tablet, one of those with a big screen and a nice leather case. I learned how to use it to read books, to watch the news, to video call with Patricia. The world, which had shrunk to the size of my house, started to expand again. And then, 6 months later, the phone rang. It was a mediator from the rehab center. Marcus had successfully completed the program. He was sober, he was working a simple job, stocking shelves at a grocery store, and living in a small rented apartment on the other side of town. And he was asking to see me. Not at home, not alone. In a mediated session with a therapist present. My heart jumped. Fear, hope, doubt, it all swirled together. Was I ready? Did I want to see him? I looked around my living room, at the afternoon sun streaming through the window, at my houseplants, at the photos of my family. I was at peace, and the question I asked myself was, am I willing to risk this peace? The question echoed in my head for days. Was I willing to risk my peace? The peace I had fought so hard to win back, that I had built brick by brick on the ruins of my old life. The very idea of seeing Marcus again brought back a ghost of fear, a chill down my spine. I had worked so hard to forget. I talked to Mrs. Dorothy. She, practical as ever, said, "Eleanor, the decision is yours. But remember this, seeing him doesn't mean forgetting. Listening doesn't mean letting him back in. You can go, hear what he has to say, and keep your door and your heart locked just as firmly as before." I talked to Dr. Simone. She went deeper. What are you afraid of, Eleanor? Are you afraid of him, or are you afraid of the mother inside of you, the one who still wants to forgive and forget everything? Her question hit me right in the chest. That was it. I wasn't afraid of the Marcus of now, the sober man under the watch of the law. I was afraid of myself, afraid of my almost infinite capacity to forgive, to love, to erase the mistakes of my child. It took me a week to decide. And in the end, the answer came not from my head, but from my heart. I had to go. Not for him, for me. I needed to see with my own eyes if the change was real. I needed to close that chapter, not by leaving the pages torn and scattered, but by putting a firm period at the end. A period that could perhaps be the start of a new sentence. The mediation session was set for a Tuesday afternoon at the community center near the rehab clinic. A neutral place. Safe. I drove myself. As I drove, I felt my stomach churn. I was wearing a simple cotton dress, and I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I felt like I was going to a funeral. The mediator, a kind man named Mr. Peterson, met me at the door. He led me to a small room with a round table and 3 chairs. There was a pitcher of water and some glasses. He said Marcus was on his way. I sat down, my back straight, my purse in my lap. I waited. Every second was torture, and then the door opened. The man who walked in was not the monster from that night, and he wasn't the smiling boy from my pictures either. He was a stranger. He was thin, so much thinner. The puffiness from the alcohol was gone from his face, revealing the cheekbones he'd inherited from his father. His hair was cut short, and his beard, once scruffy, was neatly trimmed. He wore a simple button-down shirt, ironed, and jeans. But the biggest change was in his eyes. The red, bloodshot eyes of anger and resentment were gone. In their place was a clear but tired gaze, a look that had seen too much crying, a look that carried the weight of deep shame. He stopped in the doorway when he saw me. He didn't smile. He just looked at me, and I saw both panic and hope warring in his face. Mr. Peterson invited him to sit. He sat in the chair across from me, keeping a respectful distance. The mediator began explaining the rules. Speak respectfully. No interruptions. The goal was not reconciliation, but communication. And then he gave the floor to Marcus. Marcus folded his hands on the table. They were trembling slightly. He looked at his own hands, not at me, as he began to speak. Mom. His voice was low, almost a whisper. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, not even to be here. But I asked for this meeting because I needed to say it to your face. I needed you to hear it from my mouth. He paused, taking a deep breath, and then he looked up and met my eyes. I am sorry. I am so sorry for the pain I caused you, for the fear, for the humiliation. I'm sorry for every yell, every cruel word, every night you spent worrying. And I am so sorry that I raised my hand to you. There's no excuse. There's no justification. It wasn't the alcohol. It was me, a weak, bitter, cruel me. And I will spend the rest of my life regretting it. The tears were streaming down his face, silent. He didn't wipe them away. In the program, he continued, his voice thick, they make you look at the wreckage you left behind. And my wreckage was you. I almost destroyed you, Mom. And I know that I'm sorry doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know that I know what I did. I'm not running from it anymore. I listened in silence to every word. I looked for falseness, for manipulation, but I found none. What I saw was a broken man staring at his own shards. Mr. Peterson turned to me. Mrs. Mitchell, is there anything you would like to say? I looked at Marcus, at my son, and I told him the truth. I believe you, Marcus. I believe that you are sorry, and I forgive you. A sob escaped him, a sound of such profound relief it broke my heart. But I continued, and my voice became firm. Forgiving does not mean forgetting, and it does not mean going back to the way things were. That, Eleanor, the mother who protected you from everything, she doesn't exist anymore. You killed her that night. I saw the pain in his face, but I had to say it. I am your mother, and I will always love you. But now I have to love myself more. Our relationship from today on will have boundaries. Strong ones. You have your home, I have mine. You have your life, I have mine. We will not live together again, ever. He nodded, not arguing. We can see each other from time to time, for a coffee in a public place. But my house, Marcus, my peace, they are no longer open to your storm. You need to learn to be your own safe harbor. It was hard. Every word was hard. But it was the most honest thing I had ever said to him. And so, a year passed. A year of baby steps. We stuck to the arrangement. Every 2 weeks, we meet at a simple diner halfway between our homes. We sit in the same booth by the window. We always order the same thing. Black coffee for him, tea with lemon for me, and a slice of apple pie to share. We talk about his job at the grocery store, about my garden, about the weather in Charleston. We don't talk much about the past. He's in therapy. He goes to his Alcoholics Anonymous meetings every week. He hasn't had a drop of alcohol since he got out of rehab. The relationship isn't the same. The intimacy, the blind trust of a mother and child, that's gone, maybe forever. But in its place, something new has grown. A cautious respect. A love with borders. It's a sadder relationship perhaps, but it's safe. And for me, today, safety is worth more than anything else. Today, sitting on my porch, feeling the late afternoon breeze, I finally feel peace. The house is quiet, but it's a good quiet. It's my quiet. My son is alive. He is sober. And he is becoming, at 42, the man he should have been at 22. It took a terrible act, an immense pain, for it to happen. A mother's love, I learned, sometimes has to be cruel to be kind. Marcus tried to steal everything from me. My peace, my dignity, my home. Marcus, in the end, lost his freedom for a time. But in the process, he found a chance to be free from himself. I learned that true love isn't about enduring everything in silence. True love is having the courage to draw a line in the sand and say, I love you, but I love myself more. And you may not cross this. And sometimes the family you choose to stand with you, like a judge next door, and a sister in another city, is stronger than the family of blood that tries to tear you down. And you, what would you have done in my place? Do you think I did the right thing? Let me know in the comments what city you're listening from. And if you enjoyed my story, please leave a like on the video so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you for your kindness. On the screen you'll see other stories that I'm sure you'll like. Click on one to watch. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. Until the next story.